Welcome to GTC's Teaching Tidbits. Each episode, we explore a teaching technique, tip, practice, or idea from faculty for faculty. Today, we have joining us Dr. Bonnie Smith from the Department of Human Services. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thanks, Rachel.
Oh, so glad to have you here today. Would you share with us just a little bit about your background, the courses that you've taught, the formats you've taught, etc.?
Sure. So I'm a social worker by profession. I have a master's degree in social work and a PhD in ed leadership from Clemson. I teach in the human services program, and I've taught many of the courses that are offered there. Currently, I'm teaching an introduction to human services, a couple of introduction to human services classes, personal and professional development in the helping profession, perhaps the longest course title in the history of Greenville Technical College, and also my favorite class, diversity issues in human service practice. I've been at Greenville Tech for about 21 years, and I've been teaching online and in the classroom for that whole time. So I have a good bit of experience teaching in both modalities and of course, the hybrid as well.
I love that. And as you were talking about the courses you're teaching and your background, that just lets everyone know part of why we invited you for this episode today. You have some great perspectives to share. You know, as we strive to create the best learning environments possible for our students, creating a welcoming, inclusive classroom, whether that's face-to-face or online, offers us the opportunity to create that good learning environment. But sometimes the question is, what does that look like? How do we get there? And Bonnie is here today to focus in on one particular way that we can create that kind of learning environment and some helpful tips around how we can do that. So Bonnie, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your teaching tidbit.
Great, thanks. So I'd like to talk today about two things that we can do to create a welcoming environment for our students. And so I'll be focusing on the use of students' names and pronouns. When we think about creating a welcoming environment, we might think, well, why is this important? What does this mean? What does inclusion mean? Why do we want to create this kind of a welcoming or inclusive environment? And I guess the first reason is that in business and industry right now, the concepts of DEI and B, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are hot topics. There are conferences, initiatives, programs around these topics, and the corporate environments, the corporations that are able to use these topics effectively are able to use diversity of not just employees, but also their marketing efforts to consumers. When these corporations are able to incorporate diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, they're successful. The companies are successful when they appeal to a large market. So it's a real topic that is being addressed in business and industry right now. Also, at Greenville Tech, we value our students. We value them as members of the educational community. Students are very important to our institution, and I know that we as faculty members feel that our students are important to us. I mean, we care about students. And we don't just care about our students kind of in a generic way. We don't just care about our students in the abstract. We value them as individuals. It is getting to know our students as we advise them, as we teach them in the classroom or online, or as we mentor them as professionals. It's through that interaction when we get to know the students that many of us feel good. That's when we get filled up. Feeding that exchange with our students feeds our souls. However, getting to know our students can be challenging. because each student is unique. So even if we assume that we know who our students are because of maybe some similarity that we have with them or some assumptions that we might have about them, chances are, even if we assume that we know who they are, we're off base because each student is unique. And we can't know who our students are unless we ask them to tell us about themselves. You might say, why talk about uniqueness or differences? Why focus on differences between people? Isn't that kind of counterproductive? I treat everyone the same. And if we kind of have that I treat everyone the same approach, we're really missing out. It's kind of like how Henry Ford said in 1909 that customers can have their Model T Fords in any color they want as long as they want black. To our ears, that sounds harsh. That sounds dismissive. How would you feel if you went to a car dealership and the car dealership said, they're all black, or you could have, white. You can have a white car. I think I would feel kind of offended. I would feel that they don't care about me as a consumer, that they're not listening to me. They don't care about my needs. And be right. The same is true when we're interacting with our students. If we don't try to get to know who they are, if we don't value their uniqueness, they'll feel dismissed. They'll feel like we're not caring about them as individuals. So there are a couple of straightforward ways, and inclusion isn't intuitive. We might think that we're being inclusive, but maybe we're not. Maybe we're not doing things that we could be doing to increase the feelings of students that we care about them, where it might not be sparking that feeling of being understood. So there are some things that we can do. And one is one that we do anyway. We ask students who they are. We ask them what their names are. And we might do it in Blackboard in a discussion activity. I use Flipgrid, so I ask my students to introduce themselves in a video. You might, in your classroom, you might use name tents, you might do an introduction game, you might do some kind of a getting to know you activity. And it's at that point that your students tell you their names, right? And often they tell you names that are not the name that's on the roster. So write that down, remember that name. But another thing that we can do to kind of add to the name question is asking students their pronouns. Now, this might be a new topic for you. You might not have heard of this before. I mean, you could tell a boy from a girl, right? Well, inclusion isn't intuitive. So why not ask? So what we do in the Human Services Department is we say, so what's your name? What are your pronouns? What's your major? And we just go on with our list of questions as if it's no big deal. And our students then get into the habit of saying, my name is whatever, my pronouns are whatever. So it becomes comfortable. It might feel awkward at first. It was very awkward the first semester that I asked pronouns. I felt very self-conscious when I included the pronoun question. But now, even if we don't ask, sometimes students share what their pronouns are, which is awesome. So the pronouns that we're used to hearing are she, her, hers, and he, him, his. There's also a common pronoun that we're hearing now is the they, them, theirs. So the singular non-gendered pronoun. I'm sure that you learned that they, them, theirs, these are plural pronouns, but most of the professional organizations, the American Psychological Association, the Modern Language Association, and the Chicago Style Book, all of these style manuals are now including the non-gendered pronoun as an acceptable use of that pronoun. So you might hear they, them, theirs. Or you might hear a combination of pronouns. Some people are comfortable with all pronouns. They might say she, his, them, or more likely you'll hear she, them, or he, them. In my classes, I say my pronouns are she, them. So you can use, I tell the students, you can use a female gender pronoun or a non-gendered pronoun when referring to me. So by opening the door, by sharing my pronouns as well, students begin to feel comfortable sharing their pronouns. A cool thing that's happening soon in Blackboard is adding the ability for users to change how their names appear in the courses. So rather than having on a discussion post or in a group, Blackboard group, rather than the name that appearing be, the government name, we'll be able to modify that to add our own first names, which is a kind of a cool thing. We're more likely to use the name if we see it. Well, I'm a visual learner, so I'm going to use the name that I read. So I encourage students to sign posts using the name they want to be called. When students email me, I ask them to sign their posts with the name that they want to be called, or sign their emails with the name that they want to be called. Because for me, the more often I see the name in writing, the more likely I am to use it in conversation. So I'm excited that Blackboard is opening that door for us to be able to invite students to enter their own names into Blackboard. I think that's very empowering. And then, of course, it's important for us to use the information that we get. When students tell us what they want to be called, what name they want to be called, we should use that name. And we should expect that our students, the other students in the classroom, use the name as well. And the same is true with pronouns. Students tell us what pronouns they want to be called. We should use those pronouns in the classroom. If we're not able to do that, if we're not comfortable referring to somebody with a they, them pronoun, usually you can put their name in the place of a pronoun, right? Use their name instead. And I think it's important to know that you don't have to be perfect. We've all messed up and used the wrong name in the classroom. We've all, I'm assuming, you know what happens when we assume things. I mess up often in the classroom by using the wrong name, or I'll mess up with my pronunciation of a name. If that happens, if you're corrected, if another student corrects you, or if the student whose name you use corrects you, just say thank you and move on. Thank you and move on. Thank you and move on. That's probably the least painful way and the way to normalize the learning of names and pronouns. So what questions do you have, Rachel?
Oh, thank you, Bonnie. This is so good. I think there's some good reminders in there, but also challenges as well. Just especially when you bring up the idea of assumptions, making assumptions. I teach in the communications field, and we explore perception of others and how those assumptions really cause us problems.
They put up barriers, right?
Yes.
They're walls between us and the real other.
Exactly. And it's such a good reminder. And teaching in that, I think I was very aware of those assumptions, and to this day I'm constantly challenging myself with my students about those assumptions, because I've seen so many times where that little assumption was completely proven wrong. So such a great reminder. And I was about to, as you were talking, I was about to ask you what advice you would have for those who are, a little nervous about incorporating this in. And I mean, just the help of remembering you don't have to be perfect with it, because it has evolved so much more from she, her, hers, he, him, his, that I know for those who have a wider, wider preference. For me personally, I would be nervous about getting it wrong or trying to remember it all the time. But that reminder that you don't have to be perfect and thank you and move on is such a good reminder. Would you have any other little piece of advice for those who are a little nervous about kind of dipping their foot in the pool, especially with the pronouns and
Right.
some of the concerns they have about you know remembering for each
Right.
student? Um,
Sure. So I have an example of the learning process that I'm still going through. I had a student two consecutive semesters. And in the first semester, the student used male pronouns um, and a male sounding name. In the next semester, oh, and that name was different from the name that's on the roster. So it was the nickname, but male pronouns. The next semester, the student felt comfortable um, saying that she prefers a different name, a female sounding name, and that she uses she, her, hers pronouns. So I had the third name now of this student because I had the roster name, I had the name that I remembered from the first semester, and now I have the third name and a different gender, a different pronoun. So it's challenging, right? Especially since some of our students are not able to, sometimes the students present, they appear kind of stereotypically male, but are using female gender pronouns, or are stereotypically have kind of female looking bodies, but would like to be called male gender pronouns. So it's hard. It's hard. And I messed up in the classroom one time with this student, and her face, I used the name that I had learned from the previous semester. So I used a dead name. I used a name that she's not using any longer. And her face fell. And it was like she had had the worst betrayal. I mean, that was kind of my assumption based on her body language. Like that was the worst betrayal. And I'm still carrying that around. Like that's a mistake that I made that in that moment hurt her very much. However, I don't have to be perfect, right? I can take a breath, say thank you for the correction, and move on. I was in a classroom last semester with students all who were all presenting as cisgender. They were using the pronouns that they were had always used, but we were still practicing the use of of how to introduce yourself and your gender pronouns. And a student came up to me after class and said, "I'm so glad that you brought up the issue of pronouns." This was a student who's a graduate of, she's a bachelor's degree from Bob Jones University. And she had said, "I'm so glad that you brought up this issue of pronouns because my daughter just came out as transgender. And this is something that I'm having to learn. And it's so encouraging to me that you are talking about this in the classroom because it makes me feel better about the future that my kid has because I'm worried about her." So we're not just talking to the people who are in the classroom. We're talking to everyone who they come in contact with because that's how systems work. So as we are learning and teaching our students, they're learning and teaching their families and friends and colleagues and coworkers. So it's powerful stuff.
Oh, that's great. And such a good reminder um, that humility from us is another way to connect with the students and to show them that we care. And such practical tips. We can start that inclusive environment just by calling them by their name, the name they prefer, and then asking them about their pronouns. Some of them will tell you. I have always appreciated the ones who email me ahead of class and tell me that. But this is just a great reminder of how to kind of just smoothly incorporate that into your general getting to know you
Sure.
as well.
Why
Well, thank
should that
you.
burden be on the student, right?
Yes.
Why can't we just take that away? Why can't we just take away that fear of rejection by putting the question out there? What are your pronouns?
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Bonnie, for sharing this. I know these couple of tips and just a reminder to question your assumptions and remember you don't have to be perfect will be so helpful as we continue to work hard to show our students that they are important and that they matter and that we're creating an environment, a learning environment that's the best possible learning environment for them. So thank you for sharing that today.
Thank you.
Well, I know if you want to continue the conversation with Bonnie, she would welcome you to do so. You can email her at bonnie.smith@gbltec.edu. And if you have questions that you would like to see answered, topics you'd like to see covered on an episode, please let me know. You can email me at rachel.cobb@gbltec.edu. And always, if you have a teaching tidbit worth sharing or you know someone who does, let me know. We want to invite you or that colleague here to share their wonderful ideas and insights so we can all benefit and grow together in how we serve our students. Well, that's this week's GTC Teaching Tidbit, and we'll see you next time.